Hello and welcome to our podcast, the Cat and Sam Show. Today we're joined by Miss Louise, and I'm going to let her introduce what her credentials are, and let's get this going. It's the holidays.
Hi everyone.
Hi,
It's lovely to join you, and thank you for asking me. And I was a bit flustered when I first came on because but I'm here and I made it. And I've worked in the UK for about 25 years now with sexual violence. At first I worked with child abuse and rape. So any trigger warnings to anyone that's listening, to take care of yourself when we're having this discussion. But yeah, that's what I've done. I worked for a centre that worked predominantly with survivors of sexual violence at first. So that was for the first decade of my work. I'm a survivor of domestic abuse, sexual violence and child abuse. And I think I was drawn, as many of us are, drawn to this line of work. I've learned an awful lot. To see the difference between me starting 25 years ago and now is significantly different. And I am still learning. I have to say that I am still learning, and I think most probably to the day I die, I will still be learning about this stuff and this subject. I have done a lot of recovery work myself. I have been in therapy two lots. Once when I was training to be a therapist some 16, 17 years ago for 5 years, and I worked on the sexual violence and the child abuse, and that was within my own training as well to be a therapist. And then more recently, about 7 or 8 years ago, did another 5 years with a different therapist on deep entrenched trauma with domestic abuse, which was from family members. And wow, that was quite something. That took me to places I don't ever want to revisit. Really doing deep trauma work is I haven't got the words for it. And we're just talking about verbalizing and using words. I haven't got the words for it. It felt tragic. It just felt awful. And I think it was because it was awful. Domestic abuse is awful. That word isn't enough to say it. And then, going back to my career, after that, I had a bit of a break. I was burnt out, 10 years working, setting up an advocacy service. So I ended up being an advocacy coordinator, going with women if they were raped at the time, going to they're called havens over here, which you would go to a sexual assault referral centre and have your DNA and the medicals and all of that sort of stuff if they were reporting to the police. They didn't always have to. It was quite harrowing. Now I look back of the things that I saw and experienced, but I wouldn't change it for the world, because I was absolutely privileged to work with those women. I used to go to court with them, and I don't want to use the word prepare them for court because that's a no-no in the legal system, but hold them while, and I would say prepare them for a not guilty. And that's the truth of it, is prepare them for life after court if they got a not guilty, which a lot of people thought, whoa, it's a bit pessimistic. No, that's realistic. Did that. Then went on and had a break from that because I was burnt out, had 6 months to a year off of work, and then sidestepped into domestic violence work, and then worked in safe houses with women again, worked with some fantastic people. So I worked with the women, other people were working with the children, and I learned a lot about domestic abuse. Really learned about what it was. And then I felt, just tell me if I'm going on too much, ladies.
No.
That was a long
introduction. We're riveted.
And then after that, I worked there for a few years, And I was frustrated because what I realised were women and their kids were coming in, being relocated into a different area. The perpetrators weren't. I think this is quite the case all over the world. The perpetrators weren't taken out of the area and dealt with. It was the women that had to flee and leave everything and with their kids go to another area where they were really vulnerable. And the word domestic abuse was used hundreds of times. There was all these services around saying about domestic abuse, and I realised that the women had no idea or understanding about what domestic abuse really was. And that is not in any way trying to disregard or minimise anyone else's journey that might have been in Refuge that are listening to this. So it's in no way saying that they were stupid or didn't get it. But it does need to be broken down for people to understand and for it to be prevented, for them to be not so vulnerable to perpetrators. And that's not putting the blame on the victim, the women like me, like everyone here. That is putting it where it should be with the perpetrators. So if we don't know, if we don't understand what's just happened to us, how we've been impacted, the degree of loss in our lives, of losing ourselves, losing who we are, we can't think straight, the mental health stuff, substance misuse, I mean, it's endless, the list. I realised that they would never come back if they met someone. And often women had met new perpetrators in new areas. So they'd been relocated and you thought, oh my God, even as I'm talking about it, I can feel it in my chest. I just felt like it's that shudder of like, my God, they won't come back because they think it never worked. And actually so that's me. And then I set my own business up and a community interest company, and delivered projects which was empowering education, prevention, and working. It was meant to be to get to the women before they'd got to the refuges, before they'd experienced high risk domestic abuse, but it never worked like that because I had a waiting list from the very beginning and they were all high risk. So I never got to do the prevention work that I wanted to do. It was on the other end, and I carried on. And 12 years later, I've just hung my gloves up. I don't know if that's a saying in America or wherever around the world, but sort of because I again was so frustrated, it's gone full circle. And I've spoke to Sam about this, and I don't know how Kat feels about this, but I feel like we've gone back 20, 30 years, and I feel
in some ways I think it has. I think in the newer generations that are coming up, they're really calling this stuff out, but the older generation is like, well, sit down and shut up, which kind of amazes me in some realms that that's even a thing because they live through it. And but I think that we need to talk about it, because if we don't talk about it, then how do we expect to enact change in anything? And it's like you said, you come back and you're like, I don't know. When I left, there was a talk from the perpetrator that they're just a bunch of men haters up there. It's like, no, they're not. Actually, they've done their work. It's about humans, and it's about and so there's all this misconception around the whole topic of domestic abuse and domestic violence. What it really is, there's like the question, why doesn't she leave? And somebody coined and said, why does the abuser abuse? Nobody asked that question, and we're starting to. At the same time, it is frustrating. I can't imagine your frustration in dealing with that all these years and trying to figure out your way. But I do appreciate what your honesty and what you're saying. And I think that is one thing that is about survivors. When they start to come out on the other side, they just love honesty. So I appreciate what you're saying.
It was not just upsetting. Must have forwarded. It wasn't just frustrating. It was upsetting. It was actually affecting me, and because the group work. So I did a lot of group work, and the last 4 or 5 years, there was women in my groups, significant numbers, that were losing their children, and perpetrators were getting access and custody. And that I couldn't sit with. That I had no answers to what they were experiencing. I couldn't verbalize how much I felt that they had been let down by the system, which that wasn't my job to do that. My job was to work with them and hold them. But I was holding all of that I couldn't, some of these children were being abused by the other parent, and women were being vilified, and the victim blaming was just shocking, and they were being dragged through family courts and other courts and trying to prove that they were good parents while their mental health would decline. I mean, why wouldn't it? And I had never experienced that. I'd never experienced someone taking my children, and it was so hard to sit with, because I don't know, to try and work with people and be authentic, because it's so important to be authentic when you work with women like us. They don't need bullshit. So, excuse me, you might have to edit that out, but they don't need that. Yeah, they need honesty, they need truth, and they need to be respected. They've gone through all of that. They don't need to be lied to and prettied up that it's all going to be okay. And there were women
Right.
that their kids, they'd lost their kids and were fighting and still fighting. The last project I finished in mid-November, a few weeks ago, and there are women there that haven't seen their children, and they are with perpetrators, and their children, all different ages, are suffering serious mental health, and no one is listening to them. No one. They're seen as... Yeah.
Well, it doesn't, I can take that something isn't okay in the system. I had an instant, I won't go into it, but something happened with my mother in her care. And they have laws here that prevent that. But the police know how to look for those laws, or look for those things in the medical things to see if they did that. And if it's vague, they know that that's the date that it happened, but it's not, it can't be prosecuted because now all the evidence is vague and gone. A company wants to protect itself, and then why have the law and frustrate everybody? If you can't have follow through with it, then why bother? Mm-hmm. Because it just is what it is. And I think that that was my experience in going into the safe house. I'm going to start over. That was my experience going into the safe house, was that I didn't understand what I was in, and then they told me, and then you talked in your intro about how it shatters you and breaks you, and it does. It shatters and breaks your thought in how this works. And I had family that I grew up with all the way through the when I left, and still have. And all of it just came down all at once at the same time for me.
Yeah.
And it was just, along with my health issues due to all the stress. And nobody understands that. And, I walked around with a broken heart lacking trust in the world. And it really was the outreach group and the safe houses that helped me. And then I'm extremely analytical. So I wanted to break that down and understand it. And so, that's why I talk, because I look at it and I think we can't, I don't know. I had one thing that happened that I had one thing happen when I was at a group, and they had brought in the people a woman who talks to the perpetrators. And so she was at she was at the front, and I was on the side, like in the shape of a C. So I was on a side, and then the rest of the women were at the bottom of that C. And then behind them were all the advocates. And the woman that was talking about the perpetrators said, when this all breaks down, they cry, they're upset, and that this has happened. And all the women at the bottom of the C were like, they cry, they're upset. And the advocates behind them all dropped their shoulders, like, she just lost all these women.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what is that? And so the woman that said, no, it's they cry for different reasons. She tried to backtrack it. And then I went up to her and I said, I don't understand what you're saying. And she, well, the reasoning is different as to why they're upset and why they're crying. It isn't the same as yours. And, that just seemed really foreign for somebody who has a lot of empathy. I didn't understand it. And I think what I've come to believe is that you can't take domestic violence and the roadmap that it is and place it on a normal life. Because it's not what we might consider normal. It just doesn't fit. So it has to be talked about differently, and at the same time, kind of in comparison to each other. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What do you think?
No, it does make sense. I mean, I'd love to go back to something that Lou was talking about. Because I think the other thing for us to remember is whilst we're learning the tactics and the red flags and everything else, abusers aren't stupid. They're very clever people. And this use of the family courts and our civil law and the children seems to be, they're morphing their tactics. So our conversations will need to keep happening, because if people learn and understand them from a certain tactic, they'll find a new one. They're always moving the goalposts and they're always learning new things to do. And certainly the family court, there's a big thing in this country at the moment because it's secret, our family courts, and they do need to open up, because these systems are being used by perpetrators to take the children, not because they want the children. In fact, very often they don't, and they'll take the children, then they'll palm them off somewhere else. But it's to weaponize the children, and our legal systems are allowing themselves to be used in this way by perpetrators. And that's just one of the ways that they're doing it. So our conversations, somebody said that the distributor of Lucy in the film as well, that's partly how we met. The distributor in the US said, with movies, it's a summer movie or it's got a shelf life. So it's either a summer movie or a Christmas movie, and that's kind of it. But he said there won't be a sell-by date on this film until domestic abuse is ended. And our conversations can't stop until domestic abuse is ended. And even then, we'll probably need to still keep having the conversations and exploring and understanding what has happened to us all in order to keep that prevention going, even if we ever get to the prevention. So I think what Lou brought up was...
Well, I think it's extremely important because we're raising children in it. At the same time, I'm always going to go back to that. You can't expect society to fix something that it doesn't understand. And that includes our judges and our courts and all of it. I don't know if you guys have watched or seen, and it happened, I think, a year and a half ago or so with the Gabby Petito, where they had footage of law enforcement and their interaction with her and law enforcement and their interaction with him, and how that got all screwed up. I mean, they had a witness saying, he hit her. I saw him hit her. And then when they pull him over, and the witness didn't know him from anybody, had no reason to lie or try to manipulate that situation other than the care of another human being. And they just, well, we'll just get them away from each other for one night and all is well. And she ended up dying. And, it just frustrates me because I just don't understand. And I do understand because people just don't get it. And I don't think until people start to get it. Yeah, I don't know if you have heard Sam and I talk. We talked one day about a lady at the butcher, and she went in and she said, the person helping her said to the lady, do you need a receipt? And she said, well, yeah, you know how he gets if I don't have a receipt. And me and Sam were both like, at first I was like, well, maybe he's got where he wants to keep everything straight. And Sam's like, well, you can look on your MasterCard Visa and see what she spent, the amount of money. So it's not about that. And, if you lost a receipt, then you could go and get a new receipt. So how is it that he gets that we have to be concerned? And even the butcher knows that she has to be concerned.
It's understanding all of that control, doesn't it? Because as soon as you say that, my brain is thinking, and often I think if you're in this line of work or you've gone through this, that you can hear it, you can hear the conversation clearly, and you can see things, you can see patterns, you can see behaviour. So it's not that I'm nosy, but when I'm out, there is. You can't help.
It is that
but
know
see.
them.
Yeah, it's you can't help but notice, and we need to notice, and we need to hear, and we need to see, and we need to speak, and we need to think about people's safety and how we approach that. And it's really important. I think that is part of the change as well, is people really taking responsibility. I looked at my Facebook account yesterday, and sometimes it comes up what happened a year ago, any posts, and I had something that I'd posted. I had a rant on there about a year ago because there was 2 children that were murdered, and I was just so frustrated. And I thought, I'm going to say it's a place to do it on media. And I listened to it again, and I thought that's always going to stand. What I felt and what I think is that so many people say, oh, that's terrible. That's terrible to hear, these poor children and those parents should rot in hell. And I was saying that that's okay saying that for these poor children that have lost their lives. But what about the children that don't lose their lives? There are thousands and millions of them out there that go through this abuse and live to tell the tale. And yet when they speak about it, when they're adults, when they're teenagers, they're not listened to, they're not heard. You don't say, oh, that's terrible. Oh, those poor, look at what those parents have been doing. Something happens in society that we don't listen. So when I've spoke up as an adult about the child abuse I had suffered or the domestic abuse, I'm looked at as the problem. Yet, what do you have to wait for me to die before you say, oh God, that was awful. That was really awful. So this is, it's one of those things.
I think it's a lot of just turning the page. Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah.
Next.
But this is still going on, isn't it? Those kids.
Right.
And then, they're out there.
And then you get into these relationships that are the same because you're still working it out for whatever reason. And now you're in it, in a bad relationship. Or you're not. I mean, it can go all kinds of different ways. I get that. But at the same time, I think we're raising children up in this. They become adults. They get involved in it. And then they raise children up in this. And at some point, we have to go in and say, all right, when is enough enough? When does it stop? When do people start listening? How terrible it is. And it's when you see it and you talk about it and somebody gets a moment of clarity of like, oh, I didn't understand what that was. And now I understand what that is. It's like, I'm going to kind of segue into holiday a little bit because we were kind of wanting to talk about holiday stuff today as well. I can remember a fight before any kind of celebration where you're brought down to the lowest points right before people come or you go to see people. And then right when they hit, the people that are coming hit the door, or you get to the place that hit the door, the perpetrator is totally different.
Totally.
And it throws you off key to like, what is that? And it goes into that cognitive dissonance that you can't hold two really opposing thought processes at the same time. And it's painful to do because it goes against yourself. And then everything's fine. Everything's rosy, or, jokes are said, at your expense or behind your back or in front of you. She's always having a bad day or, and so it appears to the people that you're going to see that it's her.
Yeah.
Or it's him. If it happens to be a male that's being abused. And then society just, makes their own decisions, and, and so what do you know about holidays and how that works with abusers and perpetrators? What are your thoughts?
Mine is with domestic abuse. Always is a time for feeling that this is an unsafe period. So the football's just been on, or still on, the World Cup. And with domestic abuse, it is a time where the levels of violence and abuse go up dramatically. So everyone that works in this field in the UK would know that this is a point of, okay, there are going to be more calls. There are going to be more women trying to seek refuge. There are going to be more deaths. There is going to be lots of stuff and need to keep alert. And thank goodness. I mean, I say things have gone back 30 years, but it's that it has. And then we're speaking here about this stuff, which 30 years people weren't speaking about it online and having the ability to, and the Me Too campaign. And there's so many things that are going on now. But it's known that this goes up. I mean, when I think of Christmas, which we're, you know, in the UK a week away from, it's that family. I'm always got my head on from my own trauma, but my head on from my work as well, that this is not about the financial stuff or anything else that's going on in the world at the moment with everyone struggling with stuff, but actually what's going on in people's homes. This is going to be a really tough and unhappy time. People are going to be in, you know, people have holidays, or there is, you know, more financial strains, yeah, you know, with this time of year, that this is an excuse for perpetrators to be more vile and controlling and abuse. And there's more children that are going to be sexually abused in their homes during this time of year around family members. And so it's I feel like even when we have bank holidays, I feel like, I wonder, is everyone safe? No, you know, it's, and again, I have to sort of check myself. It's not that I've got an unhappy life. I've got, I'm married over 30 years now to a healthy, human, lovely man. Thank goodness. But again, when I say thank goodness, I shouldn't thank goodness. It's like, oh, I'm lucky. Yeah. It's like, oh God, I'm lucky. Why should I be lucky? You know, but so I have a safe home. I have the things I need. The only time I'm unsafe is when I'm in my trauma and my post-traumatic stress. That's when I'm unsafe, and that's old past stuff that comes back and I'm living in. But yet I cannot help but ignore, you know, no, I didn't say that right, but I can't ignore that holiday times, birthdays. I don't know everyone's birthday in the world, but you know that there's going to be that.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. If any attention is drawn away
Absolutely.
from them,
Yeah,
it becomes problematic, and
Yeah.
it just comes out of the blue. I mean, you might not even recognize it. And I think the other thing that happens during the holidays, because you know, there's so many holidays that are going on right now around the world for different religions, is also the religious holiday, or the religious connotations about not being happy or together as family, or you know, so you have pressures that are coming from other people that are saying, oh, just put that away and we don't need to talk about it. We'll just,
very
you know.
damaging, all of that, isn't it? It's
Right. And I think,
yeah.
You know, society doesn't look at that and just the so many people go back. They'll have left and then they'll go back because it's the holidays. And it really is just an interesting situation. And I'm glad we get to talk about it, because I think others
under a lot of
don't
pressure
understand.
to be this happy family and everything's going okay, and presenting, because the perpetrator presents, and all the confusion that we as victims can feel around that start taking that it is me, because perpetrators say it's you're the problem. But you know, as you were talking, Kat, and this is the thing with domestic abuse and sexual violence, that you know, I'm no different from anyone out there. I might have worked with it 25 years, but I'm still a victim of this. And as you spoke, my brain went back to when you said about, you know, something good is happening. I didn't plan that. We're having a conversation, but that's what trauma does. That's what this stuff does. And I went straight back to a time that I was about 11, and I was due. It was Christmas time, so that wasn't the trigger. It was just hearing you say that, and just took my mind back. I thought, oh my God, I absolutely know what you're talking about from my own experience, one of many, and being that age. And I was due to play in a concert. It was the recorder. I don't know whether you have a recorder in the US. There was one of that. I most probably played it pretty badly, but I was on stage, and it was quite a big. It was quite a big theatre where I lived in one of the London boroughs, and I was so excited, as I would be. And my mum was there, and my younger brother. My mum was one of my perpetrators. And just before we were due to go up to this theatre, and I was going to play on stage, and I did, with all my class and my teachers, in front of this huge, people watching you. And as you spoke, I went straight back there. I haven't thought about this for years, but I do know that was really traumatic. And the confusion that was going on in my head at the time, which I didn't understand because I was a child. You can be a child or an adult. And she ripped my blouse off of me. And I felt so humiliated. And it was just before getting ready to go. And my stepdad was there. And I remember my bra was showing. My first bra or something. And I remember going like that. And I just couldn't understand what I'd done. I hadn't done anything, but at the time, for me, I couldn't understand what I'd done, and the dread. And then it was like dismissing completely, like this was her rage. Is get yourself together and get ready, we're going. And there was me, I can't even remember where my younger brother was, whether he saw it or not. And I got ready in my school uniform, as we always wearing school uniform, and walked to the place with her, which should have been a really happy event, and felt awful and felt terrible. And I didn't say what I felt. I didn't know what I felt. I couldn't verbalise what had happened. I didn't understand it. And I got up, and there was all my teachers there. Oh, hi, Louise. Hi. How are you? Like, oh, glad you're here with your mum. My mum's laughing and smiling and looking proud of me. And I'm up there on stage playing this recorder, and I don't remember the feeling. And that is one of the things that I just recognised from what you said. Well, I knew this happened, but this is what it is. And at the time, so I could have been an adult or whatever, but there was no reason for that. And that, there is no reason. Perpetrators do what they do.
There is a reason that she did it. You were going to get attention.
Yeah.
Getting on that stage, and she wanted you subdued so that she could get attention. I mean, that's what came out when you were saying that, is like, she got there and she was like, oh, and you were kind of like, and why wouldn't you be? You just got told that you, in a nonverbal way, that
I couldn't actually believe we were going. I think that was what I was thinking. And it was like it never happened. So the rest of the day was like it never happened. Yeah. How traumatic is that? And confusing and
the thing that I grasped from what you said was that you said, I didn't understand what I did.
Yeah.
And that's what kids do. They take it on.
Absolutely.
As this is my fault. And then they get into these relationships and they take it on as this is my fault. And we aren't taught to take it on and say, okay, how do I feel about this? How do I feel that my mom just tore off my shirt and that I'm grasping, trying to cover myself in front of other people. And then I'm told to get it all together so that I can go to a concert
where everyone is happy except for me. And that's that's what it's almost like what perpetrators do in the courts. Is like, look at her, she's the one with the problem. I'm all together. I've not got a problem. I'm here. I can talk. I can say hi. How are you? And the woman or the victim. I don't want to say it's always women. I say that for anyone that's listening is because I predominantly work with women, but it is the other way around as well.
Well, it's like Gabby's perpetrator, exactly the same thing, laughing and joking. They do this all the time. And like with you, Kat, when they sabotage anything, like birthdays, holidays, trips, mine would deliberately be late. Yeah. So it might even miss a flight, and it was deliberate because it was like, we need to go now. And so that it's creating this stress all the time, so that you're the one, the victim is the one that looks and behaves like they're a mess, because we're human beings and we do react to the other human beings we're closest to and their behavior. And it's this manipulation of what's seen all of the time. And there's the attention thing as well. But like with the football, I think sometimes it is just an excuse. Tight money, the holidays, it's Christmas.
Yeah.
It is such a fascinating thing of it's just an excuse, but also I think that you're right, Kat. There are these underlying themes of they just can't help but destroy everything that they touch.
Because it's not if the football loses, it's not if their team loses.
No.
Which people would think it doesn't matter if they win or lose. Domestic abuse goes up. I mean,
well, I kind of think that it does in one sense, that it matters to the perpetrator, especially in male culture, because they can. It's one place where they can express and be okay in their culture. My team lost. It was so frustrating, and they can express something. And I'm not talking. I am talking about domestic violence and abuse, but I'm also talking about the male culture of when we don't allow them to have any other emotion except for anger or, a leadership role, however you want to put that. But do you understand what I'm trying to say? I don't know if I'm being clear about that or not.
I think so, but I think it is
it's not an excuse. I'm not saying that.
Because there's a whole heap of men out there that are wonderful, that watch the football, that go, have Christmas, money's tight at home and things are difficult and they can't put the heating on like everyone else and they've got to watch what they're buying and the kids, want presents, it's Christmas. They have all of that as well. They don't find the excuse.
At the same time, I don't want to be dismissive. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. I don't want to be dismissive of males that aren't allowed to express, because I do think it's a bit of that problem, in that they actually feel validated in being able to express something that's definitely out of their control. They can't control whether a team's going to win or lose. They can, however, control a woman or their family, just like your mom did with you, just like any of those kinds of situations do. And they think differently. The perpetrators think differently. They think about, how can I get from point A to point B, whatever point B is? And they either do it unconsciously or they do it consciously, but they do know that if I do this, I get this with this person.
It's hard because I'm not an expert on perpetrators, to be quite honest, so I'm not, thank goodness, I don't know.
I'm not either. I just grew up with 3 brothers, and they're all distinctly different from each other. And also my dad. And I talked very openly with my dad about abuse and things. He talked about in the 50s that he can remember a song that was like, "Hit her again, Pa, hit her again." And how awful that was. And so, I mean, I think in safe places, if people feel safe, they can talk. But I do think that, and I don't remember who I was talking to. We have, if you're really joyful about something, then you've also been very sad about something, and you can manipulate in between that whole thing. And I think we have a lot of people that stay waiting for that other shoe to drop and not going too low because they don't want to go too low either. So they stay in that stagnant middle. And we're also, we have patriarchal society all around us. So we're constantly dealing with that as well. So it may not be domestic abuse, but I want to include everything in there. And I don't think that it's as easy as, cookie cutter, I guess.
If we go back to what Lou was saying right at the beginning about, I think it was before we came on, but about one of the things that she used to do in her work was simplifying things. Simplifying things doesn't necessarily mean dumbing down. I think we're talking about it now. There's 2 threads. There's, from a prevention point of view, I think for girls and for boys, and I think girls are becoming more and more less able to express as well because of everything that's how our society is moving forward. It
is complicated,
but also in a way it's not. It's about enabling our children to be able to be allowed to express themselves and not be told to put up and shut up, whether they're boys and girls, but especially all girls, but especially boys. For us to get back to communicating with each other healthily and learning how to do that is a skill. It's a skill we learn from babies. How to speak, how to communicate. It's so maybe that's an area that needs to be looked at. And at the same time, with perpetrators, understanding that they have a system, they have a way of being that really suits them. And going back to the crying thing, I saw a program once, and it's always stuck with me, when they said, people always cry in these situations. They said the difference is they're crying for themselves. They're not crying about what they've done. They're not crying because they feel bad about it. They're crying because they've got caught. They're crying because of the impact this is going to have on them, not through any empathy. And I think part of what this kind of talking on forums like Lou's own podcast, pages, all the things that we're all doing that helps that communication and whittle those things down, but into its nuggets, into its simplified forms that are easier to understand, whether you're in or out of it, or whether you've experienced it or not.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, there's that vain empathy, where it's not real empathy, but it looks like empathy, and you have to decipher that. And I think, I don't know how Lou Lou feels about this, but I feel like the big answer is in self. The big answer is in self-awareness, self regulation, self understanding, self defined. I came out and was like, nobody is coming inside of this person that I am, and they are going to define me. That is not going to happen, because that happened all the time. It happened since I was a little girl. Oh, just ask her. She'll do she'll help any way she can, because that's the way that I was groomed to be. That's the way that I was taught to be. And I don't have any problem helping people. At the same time, I do believe that we have to help ourselves a little bit more than we help others, because we can't give what we don't have. And I think that's for everyone. And I think domestic violence is everywhere. And I think it has to be discussed. And I think until you know what it is and you wrestle with what it is, you just don't understand. It's not two sides to every story, although there are two sides. But when you have one side that is unempathetic, Gary had to cough. When you have one side that is doing that point A to point B methodically to get their needs met without any thought process to who they're hurting and how they're hurting them, because they don't have it. It is a sliding scale, and it is a decision they make in how they're going to treat other people, all the way up to people who don't even think about themselves and become very, very sick in so many ways. I don't know if that simplified it or not, but I tried.
It's all part of it, isn't it, Kat? It's all, all the discussions that we have. It's people that are listening, connecting, and us connecting with what's being said as well. They don't only have to connect with a tiny bit. It might be just little snippets of what one of us says or all of us says, and different parts that allows them to investigate and just be a little bit of understanding of themselves. And I think what you were saying about self-regulating, I really, that was a lot of my work as well, is because I think we learn to self-regulate, but sometimes not very healthily, because it's literally on survival mode. So I'd self-regulate by drinking too much, by overeating and eating disorders, and oh God, the list was endless and has been endless of, I'd move my furniture around. There was OCD. There was lots of different things that I would do. I'd over-exercise and overeat all in the same day. I was trying to self-regulate, didn't have an understanding of what I'm doing, but my body was trying to do something to help me. And it was only when I started to self-care, to value myself a little bit more, to hear other people talking about domestic abuse, about sexual violence, about child abuse, I started to investigate or hear conversations and think, oh my goodness, and I remember when I first walked into the office and there's all women there working with, child abuse and rape, and saying that's absolutely not right. This shouldn't, really passionate women in this office. And I was just training then and thought, wow, been waiting to hear this all my life. Never heard it out there. No one was saying this is wrong. I'm going back a few years because I'm 54 now. So I'm going, way back a few years. In my 20s, I hadn't heard people say this is wrong.
So when I was at the safe house, they looking at the young women, and they didn't have a mom to talk to, because they didn't have moms to talk to about this stuff. for a myriad of reasons. And I I just was like, why don't we talk about it? And why is this such a secret? This shouldn't be a secret. This should be something that was discussed and talked about. And I, I got lucky because the woman that was there overstepped her bounds of being able to offer us enough information because somebody wasn't regulating her to get us through like what domestic violence was in the little capsule of 8 weeks that she really was allowed to do, to doing I think we did like probably 36 weeks. And she, in that 18 or so extra weeks or whatever it was, she talked about self-care.
Yeah.
And that was the key, but there wasn't anything to step from there to there out there that I could find. And, you know, going into mental health, it was like, they didn't get it. They didn't understand. They would listen, but you tell them something and they didn't get it. And I think one of my nuggets from that was, we have the right to be angry about situations that we've been in. That, in fact, if you're angry, that's generally your clue that something is important to you and that you need to pay attention. Now, we don't have the right to just express it unabashedly, you know, and be crazy. But when you're in court and you're trying to fight for what you're trying to fight for, it would be nice if judges would understand that maybe the person that is so angry has a reason that they're so passionately angry.
And
anger
is a healthy emotion,
right?
And it's important that we do have a space, a healthy space to actually, when you were saying about males as well, being able to express themselves as well. It's absolutely, and it's important for us to be able to, all of us, to be able to feel anger, feel everything, feel what we feel. But it's when it's anger reverts to making someone feel fearful and is in a threatening way and is used to control people. I think that's where the difference is between perpetrators and being healthy.
Well, interestingly about anger, and this is one of the things, I think it's one of the myths, isn't it? Like Jane Monckton Smith, and it's one of the things that she says, that actually perpetrators don't act. They don't act out of anger. It's they don't just snap. They don't. It's not a crime of passion or whatever. And we come back to that thing constantly, that the one that's dysregulated, the one that's angry, the ones that's actually able to feel emotion at other victims. You know, it's almost like we've got it, almost just listening to the two of you talk, it's almost like we've got it the wrong way round. You know,
right? Exactly.
Which is fascinating, and I'll need to follow one of that up in my brain as well. There was something else, Lou, that you said, and it's just gone out of my mind now.
It's okay, because I talk a lot.
No,
you did great.
It's between the two. There was something that came up, and this is what Kat and I love doing, and especially getting guests on like yourself, is because we're all still learning. We're all learning. We continue learning, and something will come up, and it'll like, oh, you know, those little nuggets of information just come together.
And I agree. I mean, we're going to need to wrap up a little bit and go on to the fireside. But I also want to leave you with something that my dad said. And he said, you we're all growing up together. It doesn't just stop when you turn 18. Growth continues. And I was listening to a gentleman last night. I can't recall who it was, but he was talking about even in families that each person, based on where they were born and where they fit in the family, got a different got a different parent than everybody else based on their growth. And I thought that was kind of a little bit of a mind blow for me, in that I know that I'm not the same person I was 5 years ago, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I think going into the holidays, to be gentle with yourself, to be kind with yourself, to keep safe, to keep on learning and pressing forward. And here on this show, we're all for safety and just presenting love to humanity in getting this better for our children. So happy holidays to everyone. And we'll see you on the other side. Thank you, Lou, for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. You're very kind. And carry on with your great work. Fantastic.
Hello. Thank you for watching our channel today. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the bell for any new content, and find us on Patreon and your favorite podcasts. We hope we're one of them. Bye-bye.